He was a widowed, lonely tycoon. She was a humble nanny who saw herself as just a nanny. Beatrice's sweetness wins over his daughter, and Victor, seeing the light she brings, feels his heart soften. In a moment of gratitude, she responds, "Oh, Mr. Thorne, you don't have to. I'm just a nanny." The phrase, spoken with sincerity, strikes Victor. He sees her purity and decides, "You are much more than just a nanny. I will do everything to have you." Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. Bethany Foster adjusted the strap of her faded canvas bag on her shoulder and took a deep breath in front of the imposing gate of the Thorne mansion. The wrought iron rose like a barrier between her simple world and the universe of luxury she was about to enter. At 28 years old, she carried the weight of supporting two younger siblings, since their parents died in an accident 3 years ago. Her income as a tutor was no longer enough, and the nanny position in one of the wealthiest families in Manhattan represented not just a job, but the financial salvation she so desperately needed. The young woman observed the perfectly manicured lawns through the gates, where each rose bush seemed to have been positioned with mathematical precision. Everything there breathed order, control, and a coldness that contrasted with the human warmth of her small apartment in Queens. Bethany knew she didn't belong in that place, but necessity had brought her there, armed only with her experience caring for her own siblings and a letter of recommendation from her former employer. Inside the mansion, Victor Thorne was finishing another video conference in his mahogany-paneled office. At 39 years old, he commanded an empire of investments and technology that spanned 3 continents. His decisions moved millions. His word was law in the corporate world, and his name was synonymous with ruthless success. However, behind the facade of a ruthless tycoon hid a man shattered by the loss of his wife 2 years ago. Eleanor had been his anchor, the only person capable of softening his heart of stone. When cancer took her, Victor erected even higher walls around his soul, obsessively dedicating himself to work in order to avoid facing the emptiness her absence had left. Maya, his 6-year-old daughter, became his only real connection to feelings, but even with her, he maintained a cautious distance, as if fearing that loving too much meant losing again. The girl had become quiet and introverted after her mother's death, spending most of her time in her room, surrounded by books and toys that couldn't fill the hole left by her mother's absence. 5 nannies had already passed through the house in recent months. Some fired by Victor for considering them inadequate, others who gave up on the coldness of the family and the loneliness of that mansion that seemed more like a mausoleum than a home. Victor adjusted the cuffs of his Italian shirt and walked to the window overlooking the front garden. The 6th candidate was arriving, and he already anticipated another frustrating interview. Women who were more interested in his bank account than in Maya's well-being, or who were intimidated by his presence and could barely form coherent sentences. He needed someone to bring life to that house, to make Maya smile again, but he was beginning to doubt that such a person existed. The doorbell echoed through the marble corridors, and Victor descended the stairs with firm steps. Through the glass of the front door, he glimpsed a female figure of average height, dressed simply, but with a dignified posture that caught his attention. When he opened the door, his eyes met Bethany's, brown, sincere, without the calculating malice he had identified in the other candidates. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I'm Bethany Foster, here for the nanny interview," she said, extending her hand with a shy but genuine smile. Victor shook her hand, noticing the slightly rough skin of someone who worked with their own hands, but also the firmness of her grip. There was something different about her, a soft light that contrasted with the coldness of his world. For a moment, something inside him moved, as if a ray of sunshine had pierced the heavy clouds that had covered his soul for so long. "Come in, please," he replied, stepping back. The moment Bethany crossed the threshold of that door, they both felt that something irreversible had just begun. She carrying her hopes and fears into that gilded world. He, not knowing that he had just allowed the entry of the only person capable of healing the wounds he considered incurable. The interview took place in a tense silence in Victor's office, where every object, from the Swiss watch on the desk to the first editions bound on the bookshelves, seemed to scream the social distance between them. Bethany answered the questions with disarming honesty, talking about her experience caring for her siblings, her passion for early childhood education, and her genuine need for the job. Victor, used to people lying to impress him, found himself disarmed by her transparency. "Why did you leave your previous job?" he asked, observing how she didn't look away when answering. "The family moved overseas. Mrs. Carter said I was like a daughter to her, but she couldn't take me with her," Bethany explained without bitterness in her voice. "I need to stay here for my siblings." Something in the simplicity of that answer touched Victor in an unexpected way. There was no drama, just facts presented with a silent dignity that he rarely encountered in his social circle. When she mentioned that she had a degree in education but had never been able to get a job in the field due to lack of connections, he felt a twinge of something he couldn't name, perhaps indignation at the waste of so much potential. "I'd like you to meet Maya," he said finally, standing up. In the girls' room, decorated in pastel tones that contrasted with the rest of the somber house, Maya was sitting on the floor, putting together a puzzle alone. When Victor and Bethany entered, the child raised her large, melancholic eyes, a miniature version of her father, but with a sadness that was heartbreaking. "Maya, this is Bethany. She may come to work here with us," Victor said with the formality he used even with his daughter. Bethany knelt on the floor, getting on the same level as the girl. "What a beautiful puzzle. Can I see?" she asked with genuine curiosity, without the artificial tone that the other candidates had used. To Victor's surprise, Maya nodded shyly and showed her the image of a flowered garden she was putting together. Bethany praised the girl's skill, commented on the colors of the flowers, and naturally began to help find the pieces. In a few minutes, something magical happened. Maya smiled, a small, hesitant, but real smile. Victor stood frozen in the doorway, observing that scene. It had been months since he had seen his daughter show any spontaneous joy. The way Bethany interacted with Maya, without condescension, without haste, only with genuine affection, awakened in him a long-buried emotion. For a dangerous moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have that light in his house every day. "Daddy, she knows about butterflies," Maya exclaimed, pointing to a piece of the puzzle, and Victor felt his chest tighten as he heard the excitement in his daughter's voice. Bethany looked at him over Maya's head, and their eyes met for a moment, charged with meaning. She blushed slightly and looked away, aware of the intensity of his scrutiny, while Victor fought against the unexpected attraction he felt for this woman who, in theory, was so unsuitable for his world. "You're hired," he said abruptly, surprising himself with the impulsive decision. In the days that followed, Bethany brought a subtle but noticeable transformation to the Thorne mansion. She arrived early, always impeccably dressed despite her simple clothes, and dedicated herself entirely to Maya. The girl began to laugh again, to ask questions, to run through the gardens that had previously seemed cold and distant to her. The sound of children's joy echoed through the marble corridors, bringing life to those spaces that seemed to have been frozen in time. Victor found himself making up excuses to pass by the playroom or the garden where Bethany and Maya were playing. Officially, he was supervising the new employee's work. In reality, he was fascinated by the way she transformed everything around her. Bethany sang simple songs while combing Maya's hair, told stories that made the girl daydream, and brought a human warmth that he had forgotten existed. But with this growing admiration also came the painful awareness of the insurmountable obstacles between them. Bethany was his employee, a woman of humble origins who depended on him to survive. Victor's corporate world, his traditional family, the society in which he moved, Everything would condemn any interest he showed in her. More than that, he himself censored himself, considering it a betrayal of Eleanor's memory to even consider feeling something for another woman. Bethany, in turn, struggled against her own conflicting feelings. Victor was kind to her, respectful, but she couldn't ignore the looks he sometimes gave her, looks that made her feel seen as a woman, not just as an employee. It scared and excited her at the same time. A man like him would never truly look at someone like her, she thought, scolding herself for feeding impossible fantasies. On Friday afternoon, after a week of work, Victor arrived home early and found Bethany and Maya in the garden chasing butterflies. The scene was so perfect, so full of life and joy, that he stopped at the top of the marble staircase just to admire it. At that moment, Maya tripped and fell, hurting her knee. Bethany immediately picked her up, consoling her with such motherly tenderness that Victor felt his chest tighten. When Bethany looked up and saw him watching, something passed between them, a mutual recognition that this was more than a professional relationship. But before they could process the moment, Maya asked Bethany to take her inside, and the spell was broken, leaving both with the disturbing certainty that they were walking on dangerous ground. That night, Victor made a decision that would change everything. The next day, Saturday, he would stay home to better observe the nanny's work. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. Saturday dawned with an unexpected storm that shook the windows of the Thorne mansion with furious gusts of wind and rain. Victor cancelled his external appointments, officially because of the weather, but really to fulfill his silent promise to observe Bethany more closely. He found her in the kitchen, preparing Maya's breakfast with a domestic intimacy that disturbed him deeply. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she greeted, blushing to see him at home on a weekend. "I thought you left early." "The weather didn't cooperate," he lied, pouring himself coffee and sitting at the kitchen table for the first time in years. He always had coffee in the office, alone, but something about the welcoming atmosphere that Bethany created drew him like a magnet. Maya came down still in her pajamas, a vision of morning joy that Victor rarely witnessed due to his rigid routine. The girl ran to Bethany, who lifted her into her arms naturally, and Victor watched as his daughter snuggled into the young woman's arms with a confidence she had never shown with the other nannies. "Can I make pancakes today, Beth?" Maya asked, using the affectionate nickname she had created for Bethany. "Of course, Princess. We'll make the most delicious ones in the world," Bethany replied, kissing the girl's forehead. Victor felt a strange pang at seeing that intimacy. It wasn't jealousy of his daughter. It was something more complex, a longing for family intimacy that he hadn't experienced since Eleanor. Bethany moved around the kitchen with a natural grace, including Maya in every step of the preparation, turning a simple meal into a moment of connection. "Would you like to join us, Mr. Thorne?" Bethany asked hesitantly, noticing how he watched everything with an almost painful intensity. "I don't cook," Victor replied automatically, but Maya had already jumped out of Bethany's arms and run to him. "Please, Daddy, it'll be fun," the girl pleaded, pulling his hand. For a moment, Victor hesitated. Men in his position didn't make pancakes in kitchens, but Maya's hopeful look and Bethany's encouraging smile broke down his defenses. He found himself standing, with his sleeves rolled up, trying not to make a mess with the batter, while Maya laughed at his clumsy attempts. "It's not that bad," Bethany said softly, standing next to him to correct his technique. When their hands touched over the wooden spoon, an electric current passed between them, and they both pulled away quickly, as if they had been burned. The morning unfolded with a surreal normality. They played in the attic when the rain increased, Maya showing Victor toys that he had bought but had never seen her use. Bethany created imaginative games that made the girl laugh, and Victor found himself laughing too, a strange sound that echoed through the long, silent walls. "Mommy also liked to play in the attic," Maya commented innocently while organizing her dolls. "She said this was our secret place." The smile vanished from Victor's face instantly. He stood up abruptly, the mask of coldness returning to its place. "I need to work," he murmured, leaving the attic before they could see the raw pain in his eyes. Bethany found him an hour later in the office, standing before the window overlooking the soaked garden. She hesitated at the door, but the stiffness of his shoulders worried her. "Maya's sleeping," she said softly. "Mr. Thorne, are you okay?" Victor didn't turn around. "She never talked about her mother with any of the other nannies." His voice came out hoarse. "Eleanor died 2 years ago. Cancer. Maya was only 4 years old." Bethany took a step into the office, closing the door behind her. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, and there was a sincerity in her voice that made him finally turn to face her. "I loved her from the first moment I saw her," Victor confessed, the words coming out before he could stop them. "She was pure light. When I found out she was sick, I used all my money, all my influence. I took her to the best doctors in the world. Nothing worked." Bethany felt tears forming in her eyes. The raw pain in his voice was almost unbearable to hear. "I promised myself I would never go through that again," Victor continued, his eyes meeting hers, "that I would never allow myself to feel this." "And Maya?" Bethany asked gently. "Maya reminds me of her every day. It's like living with a wonderful ghost that constantly breaks my heart." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it for the first time since she had known him. "You're making my daughter happy in a way that I haven't been able to in 2 years. It makes me feel like I'm betraying Eleanor, but at the same time..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The air between them was charged with a tension that they both felt but couldn't name. "I understand about loss," Bethany said softly, taking another step towards him. "My parents died when I was 25. A car accident on a country road upstate. At the funeral, people told me to be strong for my siblings, but I just wanted to collapse." Victor observed her with new intensity. "How did you manage to keep going?" "At first, I couldn't. I couldn't work properly for 3 months. My youngest brother, Lucas, was only 13 years old. He made me realize that I had 2 choices: let the pain destroy me, or use it to become stronger for them." Her tears fell freely now. "Some days it's still hard. Sometimes I still dream about them. I wake up thinking I'm going to find them in the kitchen having coffee." Victor took 2 steps to her, standing dangerously close. "How do you do it? How do you smile every day after so much loss?" "Because I've discovered that honoring those we love doesn't mean dying with them," Bethany replied, raising her eyes to meet his. "It means living in a way that would make them proud." At that moment, something fundamental broke between them. Victor raised his hand instinctively to wipe a tear from her face, and Bethany didn't pull away. His fingers remained on her cheek for a moment that seemed eternal, both aware that they had crossed an invisible but crucial line. The sound of thunder outside was the only thing that broke the spell. Victor dropped his hand, taking a step back, but his eyes remained locked on hers. "Thank you," he said finally, "for taking care of her, for bringing life back into this house." Bethany nodded, unable to trust her voice. When she left the office, both knew that something irrevocable had happened that rainy afternoon. A connection that neither fear nor social conventions could easily undo. 3 weeks after that revealing afternoon, life in the Thorne mansion had acquired a dangerously intimate routine. Victor had begun to arrive home earlier from work, always with some plausible excuse, but in reality eager to witness the simple moments that Bethany created with Maya. Dinners turned into impromptu family gatherings, where the young nanny was invited to sit at the table, and conversations extended far beyond what would be appropriate between employer and employee. Bethany struggled against the feelings that grew with each lingering look, each accidental touch of hands when passing dishes, each smile that Victor reserved only for her when Maya wasn't looking. She constantly scolded herself, remembering her position, the impossibility of it all, but her heart seemed to have developed a will of its own. The defining change came on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Maya had woken up with a high fever during the night, And Bethany, who had slept in the mansion that night due to a torrential rain, was the first to hear the girl's cries. Victor arrived at the nursery finding Bethany already taking care of his daughter, taking her temperature and applying cold compresses with the naturalness of an experienced mother. 104, she murmured worriedly, while Maya groaned in her arms. We need to take her to the hospital. The ride to the hospital was tense and silent, with Maya burning with fever in the back seat being comforted by Bethany, while Victor drove with a controlled urgency that barely disguised his despair. In the emergency room, while the doctors examined Maya, Victor and Bethany waited in the hallway in an anguished vigil. She's going to be okay, Bethany whispered, more to herself than to him. But Victor heard the uncertainty in her voice. I can't lose her too, Victor confessed in a low voice, his defenses completely abandoned. I can't, Bethany. She's all I have left of... You're not going to lose her, she interrupted firmly, taking his hand without thinking. Maya is a strong girl. She'll get through this. Victor looked at their intertwined hands, his large and rough, hers small but calloused from work. He didn't let go. It was 6 hours of waiting. 6 hours in which Victor and Bethany supported each other, alternating between charged silences and whispered conversations about Maya, about fears, about the fragility of life. When the doctor finally appeared with good news, a strong virus but nothing serious, both collapsed with relief. You can take her home, but she'll need constant care for the next 48 hours, the doctor instructed. Victor didn't hesitate. Bethany, can you stay? I'll pay overtime, whatever it takes. Of course, she replied immediately. You don't have to pay me more. Maya needs me. The simple statement struck Victor like lightning. Maya needs me, not it's my job, or you're paying me. Maya needs me. Back at the mansion, they organized themselves like a real family. Victor cancelled all appointments, something unthinkable in his routine, and dedicated himself entirely to helping care for his daughter. Bethany took control of the situation with a maternal competence that impressed him, administering medication, checking her temperature, keeping Maya hydrated and distracted. On the first night, Victor insisted on taking shifts with Bethany so she could rest, but they ended up sharing the vigil in Maya's room, talking in whispers while the girl slept restlessly. It was in those small hours of the early morning, in the intimacy forced by shared worry, that the last barriers between them crumbled. You would be a wonderful mother, Victor said suddenly, observing how Bethany adjusted the blanket over Maya with infinite tenderness. Bethany froze. Mr. Thorne. Victor, he corrected gently. Just Victor. She stared at him in the dimness of the room, illuminated only by the nightlight. I can't. We shouldn't. I know, he murmured. But his eyes said otherwise. But I can't stop thinking about what it would be like if... Stop, Bethany pleaded, but her voice came out without conviction. If you were more than just the nanny, Victor continued, rising from the armchair and approaching her. If you were our family. The pronoun our hung in the air between them like a dangerous confession. Bethany felt her heart race when Victor stopped a few inches away, so close she could feel the heat emanating from him. You don't know what you're saying, she whispered. You're tired, worried. I'm in love, he interrupted, the words coming out before he could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Bethany stared at him with wide eyes, as if he had just confessed to a crime. This is crazy, she murmured, but she didn't pull away when he raised his hand to touch her face. Maybe it is, Victor agreed, his fingers delicately tracing the line of her jaw. But I've never felt anything as right in my life as what I feel for you. At that moment, Maya stirred in bed, murmuring something unintelligible, and reality hit them like a bucket of cold water. Bethany stepped away quickly, turning her attention back to the girl, while Victor retreated, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. The next day, when Maya was visibly better and Bethany was preparing to go home, Victor intercepted her at the door. About last night, he began. It was a moment of weakness, Bethany interrupted, avoiding his gaze. We were worried, tired. It didn't mean anything. But they both knew it was a lie. When Bethany walked out the door, Victor stood in the entryway for long minutes, aware that he had crossed a line that had changed everything forever. He had confessed his feelings, and for a terrible and wonderful moment, he saw in her eyes that they were reciprocated. From that day on, every encounter between them would be charged with this unspoken truth. They loved each other, but that love was impossible, dangerous for both of them. Victor, because he could lose the respect of his social circle and harm his business. Bethany, because she could lose not only her job, but be seen as an opportunist who seduced her boss. The game had changed completely, and they both knew there was no turning back. In the 2 weeks following Victor's confession, the Thorne mansion became a minefield of unresolved tensions. Both tried to maintain appearances of normality, but every casual gesture had transformed into something laden with meaning. A simple "good morning" sounded like a caress. A shared smile over Maya's antics became a silent promise, and the moments when they found themselves alone were filled with a silence heavy with unspoken things. Victor fought against his instincts, but found himself creating excuses to spend more time at home. Bethany, in turn, had become even more dedicated to her work, as if professional efficiency could somehow erase the growing attraction she felt for her boss. Maya, unaware of the adults' drama around her, flourished under Bethany's care, becoming an increasingly cheerful and communicative child. The decisive change came on a Thursday when Margaret Thorne, Victor's mother-in-law, paid a surprise visit to the mansion. At 65 years old, Margaret was an imposing matriarch of high society in New York City, accustomed to having her wishes respected and her opinions accepted without question. She had disapproved of Victor's marriage to Eleanor, considered too new money and without proper pedigree, but had eventually accepted her daughter when she realized that she knew how to behave in society. "Victor, darling," Margaret said, kissing the air near her son-in-law's cheeks in the entryway, "we need to talk about Maya. It's unacceptable that a Thorne child continues without a proper education." Victor frowned. "Maya is only 6 years old, Margaret, and she's very well taken care of." "Exactly my point," her mother-in-law retorted, removing her kid gloves with precise gestures. "At 6 years old, she should be being prepared for her future in society." Eleanor understood that. At that moment, Bethany appeared on the stairs, descending with Maya, who had just woken up from her afternoon nap. The girl ran happily to her father, but Margaret barely greeted her, her cold eyes fixed on Bethany with a calculating assessment. "And you must be the new nanny," Margaret said, her tone courteous but icy. "Bethany Foster, ma'am. Pleasure to meet you," Bethany replied, giving a slight respectful bow. "Yes, well," Margaret dismissed her with a wave of her hand. "Maya, darling, go play while the adults talk." Bethany started to walk away to accompany the girl, but Margaret stopped her. "Actually, you can stay. What I have to say concerns Maya's future, and you are employed in this house." The tone with which she pronounced "employed" was like a subtle slap, and Victor noticed how Bethany slightly shrugged her shoulders. "I've enrolled Maya in the Spence School," Margaret announced, causing visible surprise in Victor. "It's where all the girls in our family have studied. She'll start next semester." "Margaret, Maya is happy with her current routine," Victor protested. "Bethany has been doing an exceptional job." "I'm sure she has," Margaret interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But a nanny, however competent she may be, cannot offer Maya what she needs: contact with children of her own social class, refined education, preparation for her place in society." Bethany felt each word like a blow, but she kept a neutral expression. She knew exactly where that conversation was going. Furthermore," Margaret continued, walking around the room with the authority of someone who felt she owned the place, "I believe that Maya needs permanent female stability in her life. Therefore, I took the liberty of speaking with Isabella Fairmont about a possible reconnection." The name hit Victor like a punch to the gut. Isabella Fairmont, heiress to one of the most established families in New York, had been his girlfriend before Eleanor. Beautiful, educated, perfectly suitable according to the standards of his class, and completely soulless in his opinion. "You had no right," Victor said, his voice dangerously low. "I had every right," Margaret retorted firmly. "As Maya's grandmother and as someone who cares about the future of this family. You can't live in mourning forever, Victor. Eleanor is gone, and Maya needs a mother." Bethany felt the ground open beneath her feet. She looked discreetly at Victor, seeing the tension in his jaw, his fist clenched at his side. Margaret was redesigning their future with the cruel efficiency of someone who was accustomed to manipulating lives like chess pieces. "Isabella will come to dinner with us tomorrow," Margaret continued, ignoring Victor's somber expression. "It will be a perfect opportunity for Maya to get used to her gradually." "And if I refuse?" Victor asked. Margaret smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. "Then I will have to reconsider my participation on the board of the company, my influence in the clubs where you do business, and perhaps mention to certain influential people my concern about the inadequate education Maya is receiving." The threat hung in the air like a sword. Margaret had enough power to cause real damage to Victor's reputation and business. More than that, she could question his competence as a father, something that would hit him at his most vulnerable point. "I understand," Victor said finally, his voice controlled but with a contained fury that Bethany recognized. "Great," Margaret smiled, satisfied. "Oh, and one last thing." She turned to Bethany with an expression that left no doubt about her intentions. "I believe that when Maya starts school, she will need less domestic supervision. Perhaps it's time to reassess the need for a full-time nanny." Bethany felt her blood run cold. The message was clear. Her presence was seen as an obstacle to Margaret's plans, and her continued stay in the house depended entirely on the matriarch's goodwill. "That won't be necessary," Victor said firmly. "We'll see," Margaret replied with a cold smile. "Sometimes what we think is necessary changes as circumstances change." After Margaret left, Victor and Bethany found themselves alone in the room, the weight of the veiled threats still echoing in the atmosphere. Bethany was the first to break the silence. "She's right about one thing," she said softly. "Maya needs stability and a suitable mother." "Bethany," Victor began, but she raised her hand to stop him. "I'm just the nanny, remember?" she said, the words coming out more bitter than she intended. And apparently not even that for much longer. That night, as Bethany put Maya to sleep, the girl asked a question that broke her heart. "Beth, is it true I'm going to a new school, and that a lady is coming to dinner tomorrow to be my new mommy?" Bethany forced a reassuring smile. "Sometimes adults make plans, Princess. But no matter what happens, you will always have people who love you very much." Meanwhile, Victor paced the office like a caged beast. Margaret had played her cards masterfully. She had simultaneously attacked his company, his reputation as a father, and Bethany's position in the house. Even worse, she had done it all in a way that made it seem like she was just looking out for Maya's well-being. The dinner with Isabella the next day would be the first move in a calculated campaign to push Bethany out of their lives. Victor realized he was at a crossroads. He could give in to family and social pressures, ensuring the stability of his position, but losing the woman he loved. Or he could fight, risking everything in a battle he wasn't sure he could win. The game had begun, and the first pieces were already being moved on the board. The dinner with Isabella Fairmont unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated performance by Margaret. Isabella arrived dazzling in a designer dress, greeting Victor with the familiarity of someone who knew her place in his world. At 32 years old, she maintained the aristocratic beauty she had always possessed, but Victor noticed the calculating coldness in her eyes, the same thing that had driven him away from her years ago. Bethany served dinner in silence, each movement watched carefully by Margaret. who made a point of treating her as a mere employee, ignoring the months of dedication to the family. Isabella, in turn, addressed Maya with a studied condescension, asking questions about school and activities as if she were interviewing the girl for a position. "Maya is a lovely child," Isabella commented, delicately cutting her salmon. "I'm sure she'll adapt very well to the Spence School. My cousin Caroline studied there and is now one of the most sought-after hostesses in society." Maya looked confused at her father, then at Bethany, who remained standing near the sideboard, ready to serve. "But I like studying here with Beth," the girl murmured. "Darling," Margaret intervened gently, "Bethany is an employee. When you grow up, you'll understand that there are differences between employees and family." Bethany felt each word like a cut. She remained impassive, but Victor saw the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands when she poured herself water. "Margaret is right," Isabella agreed, smiling at Maya. "You need friends your own age, appropriate activities. I myself would love to help your father organize them." The rest of the evening passed in a tense atmosphere, with Margaret and Isabella weaving plans for Maya's future, while Victor responded with monosyllables. When they finally said goodbye, Isabella lightly kissed his cheek. "It was wonderful to reconnect, Victor," she murmured. "I hope we can do this more often." After the visitors left, Victor found Bethany in the kitchen, washing the dishes with mechanical movements. Her tears fell silently into the sink water. "Bethany," he said softly. "Don't," she replied without turning around. "Don't say anything, please." "I'm not going to let this happen," Victor declared, approaching her. "Yes, you are," she replied, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. "Because it's the right thing to do. Maya needs a suitable mother, and you need a wife who fits your world." "You fit my world," Victor insisted, holding her shoulders. "You are our complete." For a moment, Bethany allowed herself to imagine that it was true, but then she remembered Margaret's disdainful look, the comments about employees and family, the ease with which they had planned her removal. "I'm just the nanny," she whispered, repeating the words that had become her prison. 3 days later, the bomb exploded. Bethany was in the park with Maya when her phone rang. It was Carla, one of the other nannies in the neighborhood with whom she was friends. "Beth, you need to know," Carla said urgently. "There's a photo of you with your boss circulating on the internet. In the nannies groups on Facebook, everyone is commenting." Bethany's blood ran cold. "What photo?" "You two leaving the hospital that night the girl got sick. It looks intimate. There's a caption saying you seduced the rich widower, that you're an opportunist who took advantage of his vulnerability." Bethany felt the world spin. With trembling hands, she opened her social media and found the photo. Victor and her leaving the hospital, her holding Maya in her arms, him with his hand on her back in a protective gesture. Taken from afar, out of context, the image seemed to confirm an improper intimacy. The comments were cruel. "These nannies without morals." Always the same story. A poor woman after money. Poor child, having to grow up seeing this. "Aunt Beth, why are you crying?" Maya asked, pulling her hand. Bethany quickly wiped away the tears. "It's nothing, Princess. Let's go home." When they arrived at the mansion, Victor already knew. Charles, his personal assistant, had shown him the photo that was circulating not only on social media, but had reached the elite business groups in New York. "How did this get on the internet?" Victor asked furiously. "I don't know, sir, but the situation is delicate. I've received calls from 3 members of the board questioning about personal indiscretions." Victor understood immediately. Margaret had fulfilled her threat, but in a more subtle and devastating way than he had imagined. When Bethany entered with Maya, Victor called her to the office. She knew from his somber look that he had found out. "I'm going to resign," she announced before he could speak. "No," Victor replied firmly. "We'll face this together." "Victor, look around you." Bethany gestured to the luxurious office, to his world. "Your mother-in-law, your partners, All of society is against it, against us. They will never accept that someone like me—" Her voice failed. "I don't care about them," Victor declared, approaching her. "You should care." Bethany exploded. "Maya will grow up hearing that her father was involved with the nanny, that I'm a gold digger who seduced a vulnerable man. It will haunt you forever." At that moment, Maya appeared at the office door, scared by the raised voices. "Why are you fighting?" Victor and Bethany looked at each other, the reality of the situation hitting them both like a bucket of cold water. "We're not fighting, sweetheart," Victor said softly, kneeling beside his daughter. "Is Beth leaving?" Maya asked, her eyes filling with tears. The silence that followed was the answer the girl feared. She ran into Bethany's arms, clinging to her desperately. "I don't want you to leave. I don't want the boring lady who came to dinner. I want you." Bethany held Maya, her own tears falling on the child's hair. "Sometimes, Princess, people have to make difficult decisions for love." "But I love you," Maya cried. "I love you too," Bethany whispered. "Forever." That night, after Maya fell asleep, Bethany packed her bags silently. She left a letter on the dresser in the room she had occupied, addressed to Victor. "Thank you for allowing me to know what a real family is. Maya is a blessed girl to have a father like you. Protect her from the gossip. Let her gradually forget me. One day when she's older, maybe she'll understand that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. Isabella will be a good mother to her, and you deserve the peace that only a life without scandal can offer. With all my love and gratitude, Bethany." She left the mansion before dawn, when the city was still asleep, carrying only a small suitcase and a broken heart. Victor found the empty room and the letter 2 hours later. As he read it, he felt as if a part of his soul had been torn away. He ran to Maya's room, who woke up asking for Beth. "She had to travel, sweetheart," Victor lied, hugging his daughter, who was crying inconsolably. Margaret arrived in the middle of the morning, bringing Isabella to help with the transition. They found father and daughter heartbroken, a house that had lost its light in a single night. "It was for the best," Margaret commented coldly. "Now we can rebuild properly." But Victor looked at the empty house, at the daughter who refused any consolation, and knew that some things, once broken, could never be rebuilt in the same way. 6 weeks had passed since Bethany had left the Thorne mansion, and life had become a succession of gray days and sleepless nights. She had gotten a job at a municipal daycare center in the Bronx, earning less than half of what she had received as a nanny. But at least it was a fresh start, away from the judgmental looks and malicious whispers that haunted her. Lucas, her youngest brother, now 16 years old, immediately noticed that something devastating had happened to his sister. She came home exhausted, ate little, and spent hours staring blankly out the window of their small apartment. "Beth, you need to tell me what happened," Lucas insisted one night, sitting next to her on the worn sofa. "You haven't been the same since you left that job." "It just didn't work out," Bethany murmured, avoiding his gaze. "It's not just that. I've seen you crying in your room. You say a child's name, Maya, in your sleep." The name hit Bethany like a punch. Maya, her sweet Maya, who was probably already getting used to Isabella, learning to call her Mum. The pain was physical, a wound that wouldn't heal. "You fell in love," Lucas said softly. It wasn't a question. Bethany finally broke down. Between tears and sobs, she told her brother everything. The job at the mansion, Victor, Maya, the happiness they had briefly shared, the destruction orchestrated by Margaret, the photo on the internet, her cowardly escape in the middle of the night. Lucas listened to everything in silence, his expression hardening as he understood the cruel manipulation that had destroyed his sister. "Beth, you ran away because you were afraid," he said finally, "but they won because you gave up." "It was the right thing to do," Bethany protested weakly. "It was the easy thing to do," Lucas retorted. "You always taught me to fight for what's right. Why didn't you fight for yourself?" That same night, while Bethany cried into her pillow, Lucas made a decision that would change everything. He took the old laptop he used for his studies and began his own investigation. If there was one thing his generation knew how to do, it was track information on the internet. The photo that had caused so much scandal was still online, but Lucas noticed something the adults had missed: metadata, times, sharing patterns. With the patience of a teenage detective, he began to map how the photo had initially spread. 3 days later, Lucas made a crucial discovery. The original photo had first been posted on a fake profile, created only a week before the scandal. Even more intriguing, the first share had been made by an account linked to a high-end public relations firm, the kind of firm that wealthy families use to manage crises and create scandals when convenient. "Beth, you need to see this," Lucas said, showing his sister his findings on a Saturday morning. Bethany looked at the screen, initially confused, then with growing understanding and outrage. "They planted the photo," she whispered. "Someone paid to destroy your reputation," Lucas confirmed, "and I have a good idea of who it was." Meanwhile, at the Thorne mansion, the situation had deteriorated drastically. Maya had entered a deep childhood depression, refusing to eat properly, having constant nightmares, and asking for Beth dozens of times a day. Isabella, initially confident in her ability to win the girl over, was visibly frustrated with the constant rejection. "She needs to forget that nanny," Isabella said coldly to Victor during another tense dinner. "Perhaps it's time to consider more intensive therapy." Victor, who had lost weight and developed dark circles under his eyes in recent weeks, raised his weary eyes. "Maya is suffering. I'm not going to medicate her for our convenience." "Our?" Isabella questioned. "Victor, I need you to decide. Either you're committed to our future, or you're not." The pressure was coming from all sides. Margaret visited daily, always with subtle comments about the need for Maya to adapt to the new reality. The company's partners made insinuations about personal stability during meetings. Isabella had become more demanding, expecting a marriage proposal that Victor couldn't even contemplate. It was Charles, the loyal assistant, who brought the information that would change everything. "Mr. Thorne," he said hesitantly, entering the office on a Thursday afternoon, "I received a call. Strange. A young man who says he's Miss Foster's brother. He wants to speak to you about evidence." Victor raised his head sharply. "What kind of evidence?" "About the photo, sir. He says it was planted, that he has proof." Victor's heart leaped. "Set up a meeting today." 2 hours later, Victor was meeting with Lucas in a discreet coffee shop in downtown. The boy, nervous but determined, presented his findings with the precision of an experienced prosecutor. "The photo was manipulated before it was posted," Lucas explained, showing the files on his laptop. "Not the content. The image is real, but the timing, the way it was spread, the first shares, it was all orchestrated." Victor studied the evidence, his fury growing with each revelation. "Can you prove this?" "I can trace it back to the PR firm that did the dirty work," Lucas confirmed. "But I need a real lawyer to make it official." "Why are you doing this?" Victor asked, admiring the young man's courage. "Because my sister is dying inside," Lucas replied with a maturity that impressed Victor. "She doesn't eat, barely sleeps, cries every night. And because you are a family, her, you, and Maya, I saw it in her eyes when she talked about you. I saw true love." That night, Victor confronted Margaret in her own home, arriving unannounced with a folder full of evidence. "You destroyed an entire family," he said, throwing the documents on his mother-in-law's mahogany desk. Margaret examined the papers without showing surprise. "I protected our family," she replied calmly. "That woman was unsuitable. You knew that. She was perfect for us," Victor retorted, his voice trembling with contained anger. "Maya loved her. I love her." "Love?" Margaret laughed coldly. "You confused gratitude with love. She took care of Maya, nothing more. You had no right," Victor said, approaching the table. "You had no right to decide for me, for Maya. I had every right as the child's grandmother." And as someone who has protected the interests of this family for decades, Margaret stood up, imposing even at 65 years old. And if you try to expose me, I will destroy you. I have enough influence to ruin your company, question your competence as a father, have Maya raised by people more stable. The threat hung in the air like a sword. Victor realized he faced a formidable opponent, someone willing to use even her own granddaughter as a pawn in a power game. "We'll see," he said finally, gathering the documents. "We'll see who has more to lose in this war." When he left Margaret's house, Victor knew that the final battle was just beginning. He had the evidence, he had the truth on his side, but he faced an enemy with decades of experience in manipulating situations to her advantage. The question was no longer whether he would fight for Bethany and his family. The question was whether he could win before Margaret fulfilled her threats and destroyed everything he loved most in the world. The opportunity for the final confrontation came a week later, during the Thorne Foundation's annual benefit gala, an event that brought together the business elite of New York City at the luxurious Plaza Hotel. Victor had carefully planned that night, knowing it would be his only chance to expose Margaret publicly in front of the same people she had manipulated against him. Bethany knew nothing of this. She was at home helping Lucas with his studies when the intercom rang. An elegant man in a dark suit identified himself as Charles, Victor's assistant, and handed her a sealed envelope. "Mr. Thorne asked me to deliver this personally," he said. "It's urgent." Inside the envelope, in addition to a letter, was a navy blue evening gown in her exact size, simple but impeccably cut, clearly expensive. The letter was short. "Bethany, I discovered the truth about the photo. Margaret orchestrated everything to separate us. Tonight, at the Foundation Gala, I will publicly expose all the manipulation, but I need you to be there. Not as my employee, but as the woman I love and choose to be my life partner. If you still feel anything for me, please show up. I'll be waiting. Victor, Maya needs us together. I need you. With all my love, Victor." Lucas, reading over his sister's shoulder, shouted with joy. "I knew he'd come after you." "I can't," Bethany whispered, but her hands trembled holding the letter. "What if it's a trap? What if he's just—" "Beth," Lucas held her hands firmly, "you've spent 6 weeks missing him terribly. This is your chance to fight for the love of your life." 2 hours later, Bethany entered the hotel ballroom, transformed. The royal blue dress enhanced her natural beauty, and she had let her hair loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Even so, she felt out of place among the guests in gala attire, sparkling jewelry, and conversations in French. Victor saw her the moment she entered. He was on stage, about to give his annual speech as president of the foundation, but the sight of Bethany left him momentarily breathless. She had come, despite everything. She had trusted him. Margaret saw her too, sitting at the head table next to Isabella, who was wearing a spectacular red dress. The matriarch pursed her lips in disapproval. "What is that woman doing here?" she whispered to Isabella. "I don't know, but Victor is looking at her like—" Isabella didn't finish the sentence, but her face paled as she understood what was happening. Victor stepped up to the microphone, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "My friends, every year we gather here to celebrate our ability to do good, to help those in need. Tonight, I want to talk about truth, about courage, and about how sometimes the people we love most are capable of the greatest cruelties." A murmur swept through the hall. This was not the usual speech about philanthropy. 2 months ago, an extraordinary woman entered my life and the life of my daughter. Victor continued, his eyes meeting Bethany's across the hall. "She brought us joy, love, and taught me that it was possible to love again after loss." Margaret stood up abruptly, but Victor continued. "This woman was slandered, humiliated, and forced to leave our family because of lies and manipulations orchestrated by someone very close to me. Someone who used their influence and power to destroy a true love because it didn't fit their standards of social convenience." Victor nodded to Charles, who projected the evidence Lucas had compiled onto the screen behind the stage. Screenshots, digital trails, documents from the public relations firm. The photo that circulated on the internet, suggesting improper behavior, was deliberately planted and spread through fake profiles, paid for by a PR firm hired specifically for that purpose. Victor revealed, his voice echoing through the now completely silent ballroom. The goal was simple: to destroy the reputation of an innocent woman, to force her out of our lives. Margaret was pale, but she maintained her haughty posture. "Victor, you're making a terrible mistake," she said, loudly enough to be heard. "The mistake was allowing you to control my life for so long," Victor retorted, stepping off the stage and walking towards the head table. "The mistake was believing that social standing is more important than character. The mistake was letting you push away the only woman capable of making my daughter smile again." He stopped in front of Bethany, who had been paralyzed in the middle of the hall, tears running down her cheeks. "Bethany Foster," he said, kneeling before her while hundreds of people watched in absolute silence. "You are the bravest, kindest, and truest woman I have ever known. You brought light into our house, love into our family, and hope into my heart that I thought was dead forever." He pulled out a ring from his pocket, not ostentatious, but a classic and elegant solitaire. "I don't care what they think about social conventions or about threats of any kind. I want you as my wife, as Maya's mother, as my partner for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The silence in the hall was deafening. Bethany looked around, seeing shocked faces, some smiling, others disapproving. She saw Margaret furious, Isabella humiliated, but she also saw ordinary people, waiters, hotel staff, smiling and rooting for them. "Victor," she whispered, "what if this ruins everything for you?" "You are everything to me," he replied simply. "Without you and Maya, I have nothing worth preserving." "Yes," Bethany said finally, her voice growing in conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ballroom exploded in applause, some genuine, others polite, but applause nonetheless. Victor slid the ring on Bethany's finger and kissed her, a kiss that sealed not only their commitment, but their victory over all who had tried to separate them. Margaret left the hall without saying a word, followed by Isabella. But Victor didn't even notice. He only had eyes for the woman in his arms and for the future they would build together. 3 months later, Victor and Bethany were married in an intimate ceremony in the garden of the mansion, with Maya as the flower girl, radiant in her pink dress, finally, with her complete family. Lucas, proud in the role of his sister's best man, gave a touching speech about courage, true love, and the importance of fighting for what you believe in. New York society eventually accepted the new Mrs. Thorne, especially when they saw how she had transformed Victor into a happier man and Maya into a radiant child. Some never fully accepted it, but Victor discovered that he didn't care about the opinion of people whose values he didn't respect. Margaret tried to fulfill her threats, but discovered that her influence had diminished over time and that Victor, supported by Bethany, was stronger than she had imagined. They maintained a formal but distant relationship, mainly because of Maya. The Thorne mansion, which had for so long been a mausoleum of memories, became again a home full of life, laughter, and love. Bethany transformed cold spaces into welcoming environments, filled the house with flowers from the garden, and more importantly, filled it with the happiness that only a true family can create. Maya grew up happy and secure, knowing she was deeply loved. She called Bethany Mom Beth, and frequently said she was the luckiest girl in the world to have 2 mothers who loved her, one in heaven and one at home. And Victor, the tycoon who thought he had lost forever the ability to love, discovered that the human heart has an infinite capacity for renewal when it finds the right person. Every morning beside Bethany was a reminder that true love always finds a way, no matter how many obstacles are placed in its path. In the quiet of their nights together, when Maya slept and the house rested in peace, Victor often gave thanks in silence for the storm that had brought Bethany into their lives. Because sometimes the best blessings come disguised as the worst adversities, and the truest love is born from the courage to fight for it, even when the whole world is against you.